Hello and welcome. It's Global News and Zoom on Nigeria on Echo Television International. The headline says Kuwait votes in legislative polls. Ex-Vice President Pence formally enters presidential race. Moscow to face Ukraine in United Nations top court. Australians facing death penalty granted mercy, and Zelensky applauds Ukraine advance over counter-offensive speculation. On elections, electorates in Kuwait have begun to cast their ballots in the 7th legislative election in just over a decade, following continual political crunches that have undermined parliament and delayed reforms. On Tuesday, voting started at 8 a.m. 5 o'clock GMT and will continue until 8 a.m. 17 o'clock GMT. Results will be announced on Wednesday, according to reports. Over 793,000 eligible voters will have the chance to determine the makeup of the 50-seat legislature in the only Gulf Arab state to have an elected parliament with powers to hold the government to account. A total of 207 candidates are running for a 4-year term as lawmakers, the lowest number in the Nigerian elections since 1996. They include opposition figures and 13 women. Kuwait's Emir Nawaf Al-Ahmad Al-Sabah called the vote last month after he had again dissolved parliament amidst a persistent political deadlock. Constant standoffs between the branches of government have stopped lawmakers from passing economic reforms, while repeated budget deficits and low foreign investments have added to an air of gloom. Power struggle lately aimed around a controversial bill that proposes the government take over consumer and personal loans of Kuwaiti citizens. The government says the move will be too expensive, costing almost $446 billion in public funds, while MPs argued it will cost significantly less, under $6.5 billion. The ongoing rift between elected lawmakers and an appointed cabinet has resulted in a decay of social services like healthcare and education. Lack of stability has also scared off investors in Kuwait's petroleum industry, which accounts for 7% of the world's crude reserves. Human rights activist Hadil Bakri said it was still important to cast a ballot despite widespread frustration with the political elite. While lawmakers are elected, Kuwait's cabinet members are installed by the ruling Al-Sabah family, which maintains a strong grip over political life. Again, on elections in the United States, ex-U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has officially announced he will campaign for the Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential race. The announcement sets him up against former President Donald Trump, the present front-runner and Pence's former boss. On Monday, Pence's campaign filed a declaration of candidacy with the Federal Election Commission, and the 63-year-old is anticipated to launch his campaign on Wednesday in the early nominating state of Iowa. The firm's social conservative and evangelical Christian, the former governor of Indiana, has progressively distanced himself from Trump after rejecting the former president's demands that he overturns the 2020 election in his role as president of the Senate. Pence joins a crowded and still growing field of Republican candidates, which includes Trump, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Tim Scott, and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum is also planning to join the race on Wednesday, according to a person familiar with the Burgum's plans, while former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is jumping into the race on Tuesday, bringing the total number of Republican candidates into double digits. The number of candidates competing for the nomination concerns several Trump opponents. Inside the Republican Party, who fear the anti-Trump votes could be split, handing the party's nomination to the former president. Pence has spent much of the last 2 years touring early nominating states such as Iowa and New Hampshire to reinforce his political vision as a Christian conservative Republican in that order. He is framing himself as a traditional Republican concerned with fiscal responsibility and family values, who can deliver Trump's economic policies without the drama. He has also allied himself strongly with Ukraine and refused to rule out cuts to welfare payments. While his politics are popular among Republicans, critics question whether Pence has a constituency in a party that is more focused now on populism and cultural politics than traditional conservatism. Ukraine and Russia are set to face off at the International Court of Justice, ICJ, the top United Nations court, over Moscow's support for pro-Russian forces blamed for insurrection against the Ukrainian state and armed violence that included the shooting down of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 in 2014, killing at all 298 passengers and crew. On Tuesday, judges at the ICJ in The Hague will hear Ukraine's assertion that Moscow violated the United Nations Anti-Terrorism Treaty by equipping and funding pro-Russian separatists who international investigators concluded had used a Russian missile to shoot down the Malaysian jetliner over eastern Ukraine almost 10 years ago. Lawmakers for Ukraine will speak today from 10 o'clock a.m. local time, 8 o'clock Greenwich Meridian time, while Russia's will address the court with a response on Thursday, the ICJ said in a statement. Ukraine will then reply on June 12th and Russia on June 14th. Kyiv accuses Russia of supporting pro-Moscow forces in Ukraine's Donbas with weapons and money, and thereby violating the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism adopted by the United Nations. Ukraine is seeking damages for the fighting, which started in 2014 and led to nearly 13,000 people killed in the 8 years that led up to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The ICJ said in a statement, Ukraine claims that Russia instigated and sustained an armed insurrection against the authority of the Ukrainian state in eastern Ukraine and created a climate of violence and intimidation against non-Russian ethnic groups. Now, after Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese paid an official visit to the Southeast Asian country of Vietnam, 2 Australians sentenced to death in Vietnam have been granted clemency. Albanese said, according to reports on Monday night, that the substantial breakthrough was due to improving diplomatic ties between the two nations. I made representations to the Vietnamese Prime Minister yesterday morning, and by yesterday afternoon, the President had signed the clemency orders, he said, adding that Australia very much welcomed this. We make representations on behalf of Australian citizens, and we are very pleased that Vietnam has agreed to the request, and we thank them for it. Albanese said he will not disclose the names of the people granted mercy as they had requested privacy. The Prime Minister had traveled to Vietnam over the weekend, where he met his counterpart, pharmacist Minh Chinh. It was the Australian Prime Minister's first official visit to the country, and he said the trip provided an impetus for this outcome. He said Australia has also made presentations on behalf of 73-year-old Tran Van Cam, a Vietnamese Australian man sentenced in 2019 to 12 years in prison by a Vietnam court that had found him guilty of terrorism charges. Albanese, who said he wants Vietnam to become one of Australia's top-tier partners, signed a raft of agreements during his visit to Hanoi, including a 105 million Australian dollars, 69.4 million US dollars package to help Vietnam decarbonize its economy. The two nations are also hoping to finalize a comprehensive strategic partnership by the end of the year, a move Albanese said will signal the trust that we have in each other as a top-tier partners and enduring friends. For his part, pharmacist Pham said Vietnam was key to enter a new chapter of strategic collaboration and elevate the friendship with Australia to a higher level. He added that both leaders had reaffirmed the importance of ensuring peace, stability, security, safety, freedom of navigation, and overflight in the East Sea or the South China Sea. Vietnam has long been embroiled with China in a territorial dispute over a potentially energy-rich stretch in the South China Sea, a strategic waterway through which more than $3 trillion of commerce passes annually. Australia, which has also become increasingly concerned over China's growing military and economic clout in the Asia-Pacific region, is seeking greater cooperation with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and other partners, including the United Kingdom and the United States. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has lauded his forces after Ukrainian forces pressed forward in many sections of the front line with Russia amid speculation the rising combat activities may signal that Kyiv's long-expected counter-offensive is getting underway. On Monday, in his nightly video address, Zelensky mocked what he described as Russia's hysterical reaction to every operation undertaken by Ukrainian forces and signaled out 2 Ukrainian units who skillfully, decisively, and effectively defend our positions, destroy the occupiers, and most importantly, move forward. I am grateful to each of our warriors, to all our defenders who gave us the news we expect. Bakhmut direction, well done warriors, Zelensky said in his address, which did not directly address whether the long-awaited counter-offensive had started. We see how hysterically Russia perceives every step we take there, every position we take, he added. The enemy knows that Ukraine will win. They see it, they feel it, thanks to your strike soldiers, and in particular in Donetsk region. Syrsky, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces, Olegda, said earlier on Monday that his troops continued moving forward near Bakhmut. Russian fighters and officials said the situation there was very difficult, despite Moscow claiming to have captured the city late last month, following what had become the war's longest and bloodiest battle. Ukraine had insisted its forces retained a small foothold in the eastern city. Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malaya also said Ukraine was shifting to offensive actions along parts of the front, but dismissed suggestions that this part of a major operation. Countering those claims, Russia's military said it thwarted two large-scale Ukrainian offensives against its forces in eastern Ukraine since Sunday and had inflicted major losses on Ukrainian forces in what appeared to be Moscow's attempt to portray the military activity as the start of Ukraine's counter-offensive that was failing early. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement the enemy launched a large-scale offensive in 5 sectors of the front in the South Donetsk direction. Early on Tuesday, Russia's Defense Ministry asserted that 8 of Ukraine's Germany-made Leopard battle tanks were among 28 tanks destroyed in the fighting, along with 109 armored vehicles and hundreds of Ukrainian troops killed. But some pro-Kremlin military bloggers painted a different picture of the fighting, acknowledging that Kyiv's troops had made some quick gains. The boss of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, also said on Monday that Ukraine's troops had made gains near Bakhmut. And here are more stories. Brazil's leader reveals plan to end deforestation. The administration of Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has announced its plan to eliminate deforestation by 2030 as part of an international pledge to protect the environment. Lula and his Environment Minister Marina Silva unveiled the action plan for the prevention and control of deforestation in the Amazon on Monday, touting it as the latest step in the aggressive platform to combat climate change. Brazil has resumed its leading role in tackling climate change after 4 years in which the environment was treated as an obstacle to the immediate profit of a privileged minority, Lula said in a report alluding to the policies of his predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro. But rich countries also need to do their part. They were the ones who, over the centuries, devastated forests the most. 15 government ministries collaborated on the plan, which includes advancing techniques for documenting and tracking illegal deforestation. The plan stipulates increased use of satellite imagery to identify illegal logging, ranching and mining operations. Government databases containing financial intelligence, for example, will also be deployed to track the flow of money from unsanctioned operations in the Amazon rainforest. And in African scenes, Angola and Portugal signed new deal. João Lourenço, the president of Angola, has received the Portuguese president Antonio Costa in the capital Luanda on Monday. Ministers from both countries signed a total of 13 agreements ranging from financial to legal. I have to say that we sense a great willingness to collaborate on the part of the Portuguese justice system, with whom we were able to exchange not only information but also the alignment of Angola's anti-corruption strategy, and to say that in principle everything that was asked of the Portuguese authorities so that we could find the right correspondent, said Angolan President João Lourenço. The Portuguese Prime Minister announced a significant surge in the credit line granted to Angola to support the Angolan government's ambition and strategic approach to diversifying the country's economy. We have significantly increased the credit line from 1,500 to 2 billion euros, announced Antonio Costa, Prime Minister of Portugal. The cooperation program signed between Portugal and Angola will last until 2027. Let's take a quick break. When I come back, I'll bring you more stories. Stay with us. You're welcome back. Here are more stories. NLC TUC holds strike. Yesterday, the organized labor made up of the Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, and the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, agreed to suspend its planned strike set to start tomorrow, Wednesday, to enable further negotiations with the federal government. This was part of the resolutions reached at the end of the meeting late yesterday evening. Monday's meeting and resolution were attended and signed by Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila, Chief of Staff to the President, Festus Osifo, President, TUC, Nuhu Toro, Secretary General, TUC, Joseph Ajero, President, NLC, Emmanuel Ogbaja, MNI, General Secretary, NLC, and Ms. Kachalom S. Daju, Permanent Secretary, Federal Ministry of Labour and Employment. Other resolutions arrived at the meeting include continued engagements by the TUC and the NLC with the federal government and secure closure on the resolutions above. The Labour Centres and the federal government are to meet on June 19, 2023 to agree on an implementation framework. The federal government, the TUC, and the NLC are to establish a joint committee to review the proposal for any wage increase or award and establish a framework and timeline for implementation according to the negotiating committee. In a linked event, the National Industrial Court, NIC, sitting in Abuja yesterday, stopped the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, and the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, from embarking on their planned strike to protest the unilateral removal of fuel subsidy by the federal government. The order came on the day that the NLC returned to the negotiation table, having earlier refused to attend the meeting on Sunday, insisting that the government return to the price of petrol to the status quo. This is even as the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria, TUC, made public its demands and presentation to the government, among which were 200,000 minimum wage and subsidy on food items. Remember that the TUC had in a meeting with government representatives at the presidential villa in Abuja on Sunday, demanded payment of a new minimum wage to mitigate the effects of the subsidy removal, but was silent on the figure. The court, in a ruling delivered by Justice O.Y. Anuwe, banned the two unions from going ahead with the strike pending the determination of a suit brought before it by the federal government. The court held that the interim order as well as the substantive suit should be immediately served on both the NLC and the TUC, which were cited as defendants/respondents on the suit marked NICN/ABJ/158/2023, even it fixed the matter for hearing on June 19th. The court order followed an expert application FG filed through the Federal Ministry of Justice. FG's lawyer, Mrs. Maimuna Lami Shuru, who moved the application, maintained that the proposed strike was capable of disrupting economic activities, the health and education sectors. And finally, on the news, share intelligence Tinubu to security agencies. On Monday, President Bola Tinubu tasked security and intelligence agencies in the country on the importance of sharing information and intelligence among themselves, saying hoarding such resources could be counterproductive in the fight against terrorism. The president spoke after undertaking a tour of the new Office of National Security Advisor and facilities at the National Counter-Terrorism Center, NCTC, in Abuja. While noting the determinations shown in countering terrorism and the state-of-the-art facilities at the two facilities, the president emphasized the significance of backing such efforts with knowledge. He said his administration had recognized that in order to achieve economic revival, prosperity and development, security should be of optimum priority. He said, and I quote, "It is a great joy to see that we are getting proactive resources to prepare ourselves. Terrorism is not unique to Nigeria alone, it is across the world, and we have to fight it, we have to eliminate it completely. If we as Nigerians are looking for economic revival, prosperity and development, we have to give priority to security. What I have seen here is demonstration of intelligence efforts to counter terrorism. This must be backed by knowledge. Counter-terrorism that is not backed by knowledge and intelligence is not going to be of any service to any nation. We are going to work on that together. The efforts of the entire armed forces of this country must be put together in a way that there will be one single focus on securing the country. You can have disharmony in an orchestra. We must focus on one tunnel, coordinate, share information, share intelligence, and work harder. You cannot hoard information. You cannot hoard intelligence. I am glad that Nigeria is on the path to success. We will, I assure you, will make it a priority, and that is why I am here this morning." President Tinubu, who described the tour of facilities at the new ONSA building as very significant, expressed his willingness to do whatever was required to support the nation's security architecture. The NSC Babangana Mungono, in his remarks, appreciated the president for making the visit his first engagement outside the villa, saying that it reinforces his commitment, dedication, and inflexible rigidity to making sure that the security misfortunes of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and by extension, the sub-region, are overcome within the shortest possible time. Mungono, a retired Major General, promised the total commitment and dedication of the Office of National Security Advisor, ONSA, to ensure that President Tinubu realizes the promises he made to the Nigerian people on security. Let's take a quick look at the major stories. Kuwait votes in legislative polls. Ex-VP Pence formally enters presidential race. Moscow to face Ukraine in United Nations top court. Australians facing death penalty granted mercy. And Zelensky applauds Ukraine advance over counter-offensive speculation. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Duraki. Enjoy the rest of your day.